You're watching Beyond Markets, where we bring you up to speed on development outcomes on the continent. Welcome, I'm Esther Awoniyi. On today's show, we'll explore the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on Nigeria's economy and assess the central bank's monetary policy response. As always, you can join the conversation on social media. Let me know what you think about the topics we discuss. And to do so, use the hashtag Beyond Market. You can also send a message to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther Awoniyi. Now, in a bid to cushion the economic impact of the coronavirus pandemic on the Nigerian economy, the Central Bank of Nigeria announced 6 policy measures that include the creation of a 50 billion naira credit facility for households and small and medium-sized enterprises. Mustafa Chike-Obi, Executive Vice Chairman of African Advisory, joins me now to discuss the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Nigeria's economy and also assess the country's response so far. Mustafa, thank you for joining me today. Pleasure having you on the show.
My pleasure.
Before we go into the CBN has announced a broad policy response to the COVID-19, as we've seen other jurisdictions do, the US and some countries in Europe. I'd like us to, first of all, talk about the initial impact that we saw, that initial panic, starting with the FX market. We did see the Naira weakening when we saw foreign portfolio investors selling off assets, across bonds, particularly equities, and just basically rushing to the INE window to just basically cash out. We saw broad weakening of the Naira, but then the CBN did come out to say, look, we haven't seen no fundamentals to support a devaluation of the Naira, which everyone thought was quite inevitable, as it were. But we did see that surprise response from the CBN. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, let me first of all say that, contrary to what people think, I think the government has acted actually quite quickly to deal with this crisis that hasn't quite hit us 100%, but it's coming. I think setting up a committee to review the impact of not the coronavirus, because it hasn't hit us hard, the virus itself, and I'm not a doctor, so I won't speak much on that. But the economic impact that we're going to feel from the rest of the world basically shutting down, I think that they've been very proactive in preparing for it. And so I commend them for it. For the CBN specifically, they rolled out these measures. I think they're good in principle, but I don't think they go far enough. I think that 50 billion is a small amount, and we have to look at the details of how we will be disbursed. As you know, these things take a while. You apply for the loan, it takes a while, it goes to the banks. So it has to be loans that can be disbursed very quickly. They have to shorten the procedure for making sure those loans are disbursed and available immediately. So I think that there's some devil in the details, but the general thrust to do something to anticipate the problems down the road is very good.
But what are your expectations in terms of what this committee will come up with? And just what allowances do we have, looking at the budget, to make cuts here or adjustments there in a way that doesn't, I guess this is difficult to say, obviously would significantly impact on spending and how, what we spend on, especially on capital projects. But I'm just wondering, how much allowance do we have?
Well, this was always going to be the problem. The budget, as you know, and the minister will admit that, was revenue challenged. And there was a lot of effort to increase revenue because there was no way with the 3.4 trillion expected revenue, federal government revenue, you were going to be able to fund a 10 trillion budget without a lot of borrowings and extra revenue coming in. So, and then you have a situation where you're expecting a slowdown in activity, and the response usually to a slowdown in economic activity is stimulus. So here our revenues are falling because of the oil price and general slowing of economy, and you don't have actually cutting the budget will only make the economy slow down even more. So the question is, how do you create a fiscal stimulus in the face of dwindling revenues and slowing economic activity so that your economic activity picks up? It's a very, very big challenge. And I think the word I come up with is we have to all make sacrifices. We have to be prepared for a period, 6 months to 12 months, of very, very difficult economic circumstances.
Would you say that a recession is inevitable for us at this point?
Yes.
When we do 6 months, 1 year when we do look back,
I can tell you what is
on the
for
other
sure.
side of the end of the pandemic, hopefully?
I hesitate when I said yes. There will be a contraction, but whether it meets the technical definition, whether it's long enough, I think it's 3 successive quarters that call it recession.
Two
successive quarters. So whether it goes on for 2 successive quarters, I can't tell you, but there will be a contraction at some point in the near future. And it will be very painful because we're already living basically on very lean, the economy is very lean. I want to emphasize sacrifices. Some of it has to be symbolic, some of it has to be substantive. The symbolics, our leaders, president, governors, ministers, have to appear to cut some of their apparent spending. The convoys have to be cut. Things that people see that show our leaders are aware and they're making sacrifices. Then there has to be substantive sacrifices. I think there'll be layoffs. I think that, going back to CBN, I think there has to be some kind of regulatory forbearance, more than has been announced, and we want to go into details later, on the banks. Because you're going to see a massive increase in bad loans, and there has to be some way of dealing with it before it becomes a regulatory problem.
Okay, let's go right into the CBN's response. Obviously, there is mention of regulatory forbearance. CBN did say that it's ready to, of course, assist the banks, and not just banks, households, and even individuals. So part of the policy measures, there were 6 of them. Let's quickly take them one after the other. Extension of moratorium on all CBN's intervention facilities. They've been granted a further 1-year moratorium on those facilities, so they'll be extended for 1 more year. And of course, the loans, the interest rate on some of those loans too have been reduced from 9% to 5%. So we have these interventions across, especially agric and manufacturing, the farmers. So we're seeing the CBN willing to support farmers. But he also mentions households at this point. Not deep details into that, but the general idea is for those who struggle, for small business owners who are going to struggle, the CBN has put together a pool of fund, 50 billion naira, to support these sectors. What are your thoughts on that? I'm
going to answer all these 6 policy measures. I'm going to put them in the symbolic and substantive groups. That is symbolic. It's not going to make much of an impact. It's a good thing to say. But 50 billion divided by the households in Nigeria, it comes to very little. The CBN intervention funds are really not a big part of the loans outstanding. Well, I think we're about 18 trillion of advances by the banks. CBN intervention funds cannot be more than 500 billion. So it's a small.
You think it's too small?
It's a small amount, but it's a symbolic gesture that goes in the right direction. But it will not move the needle in any substantive way. Because
apart from individuals and small businesses, the CBN is also talking about hoteliers, airline service providers, healthcare merchants. So it's actually a broader.
It's a very broad.
Airline industry, that's capital intensive.
Yeah, what I say is it's a symbolic thing. It sounds good, but the impact will be very minimal.
Yes, if they said impact for us.
Yes, impact. If they say 1 trillion, then I say yes, that's probably going to work. But 50 billion is not enough.
Are we saying this, on the basis that, at the moment, Nigeria only has, officially now, we only have 1 case. I think measures have been taken to properly monitor the borders and, of course, increase screening and, of course, put some countries, some travel restrictions on certain countries that have been badly hit. And the fact that maybe, at least in the short term, we're not expecting an explosion of cases. We're still on the watch out, obviously. So do you think that a number of these policies are being taken to say, okay, in the case of an eventuality, if, worst case scenario, but for now, there is no apparent urgency for us to do.
No, I'm not talking about the virus at all. I'm talking about the economic impact of the virus. So, for example, all the foreigners who come here for business, to work, we're at the CBN roundtable, and the Minister of Transport, I don't know whether it's transport or transportation, but the Minister of Transport said that they will have finished the Lagos-Ibadan rail line in May, for certainty. But that all the Chinese workers that went home for Chinese New Year are trapped in China, and so now there's a delay. So the amount of people coming in to Nigeria to work, to spend money, have slowed down. Our supplies, we're an import-dependent nation. Our supply chains have been disrupted. So there's economic impact from what's happening abroad, without us even having any cases here. So our hotels are going to suffer, our transportation is going to suffer, a lot of things are going to suffer. That's what we're talking about. So actually the demand for foreign exchange, and that's what the CBN governor may have been referring to, has diminished already. They are seeing that a lot of LCs are not being opened anymore. So while the supply may have diminished from the oil prices, the demand for FX has also diminished. And so when he's talking about fundamentals not supporting a devaluation, I don't like to say devaluation, I like to say adjustment. An adjustment in foreign exchange rates, it's not as urgent as it may appear by just looking at one side, which is the supply side. The demand side has weakened also. So I think he can manage an orderly adjustment, and I don't think that our big problem is going to be the path of the. I don't think the Naira is going to go to 450 tomorrow. I think if there's any adjustment, it will be orderly, and I think he has the firepower to keep it orderly.
But you know, before now, there was always that constant conversation about the fact that inevitably the Naira was too strong and would need devaluation. It's been hanging, adjustment. It's been hanging over the equities markets for a while now. Every market analyst I talk to keeps saying that, look, yes, we see the market go up sometimes, you know, the not usual oscillations, but that they can tell me that that one issue at the center of many of the downturns that we see at the market is because investors remain convinced that it's only a matter of time before we see that adjustment in the currency. They also say that, look, that multiple exchange rate system that we have, even though it's worked for us unorthodox, but it's worked somehow to serve our needs, to serve the needs of the market, they believe that because it's still artificial and is being pegged and controlled by the monetary authorities, that in the long term, it wouldn't work. So I'm just trying to collapse that conversation into this.
Let me surprise you. CBN is aware of all this. The challenge they have is twofold. One, how do we do it in an orderly fashion? Because it's not the adjustment that causes problem. It's the step function when it goes from 150 to 360. That's what causes disruption. So if it goes from 150 to 160 and to 170 and to 180, people can adjust, and it can be a smooth adjustment. So an orderly adjustment is one challenge. The second is a political challenge. You have a political leadership that counts the political cost of such adjustments. And so you have to persuade. The CBN governor has bosses. The governors, the president, he has a constituency that he has to worry about what he does, how it affects them as well. So I think that managing an orderly adjustment and the political process, but I'm sure they are aware that the currency needs to be adjusted. The question is, how do I get the political people who will sell it, the politician who will sell it to the people, how do I get them on board? And how do I do it in an orderly fashion so I don't cause inflationary disruptions and economic disruptions? But I think they are aware of everything you've said.
If you're just joining us, Mustafa Chike-Obi, Executive Vice Chairman of African Advisory, is our guest today on the show, and we have been assessing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Nigeria's economy. Mustafa, thank you for your time so far. Let's quickly wrap up on the policy response of the CBN. One of the other on the list yesterday was a regulatory forbearance, where the bank says it grants all deposit money banks leave to consider temporary and time-limited restructuring of the tenure and loan terms for businesses, individuals, households most affected by the outbreak, particularly, he said, in oil and gas, agri, and manufacturing. So, I mean, it would suggest that some of the loans, I mean, obviously loans will be restructured in such a way that will give those who have taken the loans perhaps a longer time to pay so that there's the little impact. But then he also said at the same time, the bank, that's the CBN, will ensure that these banks are not exposed to, I suppose, non-performing loans or any risk that will come from doing this regulatory forbearance. Obviously, would you consider this an appropriate policy response?
It's very important. I think it's the most important of all of them. But the language is a bit vague. If I was a banker, I would want more clarification as to exactly what CBN means by this. So I think the language has to be tightened, and the forbearance has to be clear, so the banks know what they can and cannot do. Because what this exposes the bank to is he gives a forbearance, and then the banking supervision comes back a year later and says, oh, you shouldn't have given this, you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done this. It should be clarified. But what I would suggest is that they basically say they suspend for the next 12 months any write-offs. So any bank that has a bad loan should not have to make a provision. So suspend provisioning for bad loans for 12 months. I think that will be clear to the banks. And banks at least will now know that in the next 12 months, even if a loan goes bad, it will not lead to an erosion of their capital, at least for the next 12 months. And they have 12 months to work it out and get over the system. So I'll be clear, it's very important that the banks are engaged and made partners in doing this, because they have much more money than the federal government. And if the banks feel that their monies can be brought into play, I think that will help a lot.
Now, the CBN also stressed, yesterday that at the end of the day, it remains the bank of,
last resort,
and also to the federal government, suggesting that, look, whatever extraordinary steps that we need to take as we continue to monitor events, if things go bad, on the COVID side, is if we do have more cases and we do see a bigger impact, the CBN is ready to step up. We've seen other banks in other jurisdictions also make such statements. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on what we're learning from this. The finance minister did say, and I saw a newspaper headline where she said, look, this COVID-19, this pandemic has given strengthened the resolve of the authorities, the fiscal authorities, to diversify the economy even faster. And it's funny because, talking to analysts, talking to economists over in the last couple of months, we keep talking about diversification. And one thing everyone has said is that the pace is too slow. The momentum is not good enough. So I'm thinking, is this a firepower that we've been waiting for to help, give us more momentum?
You mean lack of firepower? Because
more firepower, more momentum
more incentive
to help us to diversify faster, to just, have that sense of urgency.
I'll say a few things. I think the most important thing for me out of this is because we're so reliant, more reliant than probably anybody else, on oil revenues for our foreign exchange purchases, combined with foreign exchange earnings, combined with the fact that we are an import-heavy nation. It's time Nigeria considered for every budget cycle, that's the yearly budget cycle, we should hedge for our 1 year production of oil in terms of volume and price. At the same time, we prepare the budget. So what happens is that you have certainty as to how much oil you can sell and how much oil, what price you can sell it for the next 12 months. So we're not subject to the vagaries of the market. People will say, well, if you hedge it at 60 and it goes to 70, you leave $10 on the table. But you have 20 billion barrels under the ground. Whatever that number is, a lot of barrels under the ground. As market rises, the value of your reserves rise, so it doesn't really hurt you. What hurts you is when the price falls, like it has just done. You don't have the revenues for the year to fund your budget, and you also, what's on the ground has a lower value, it falls. So you have the double hit. So it's Mexico just announced that they hedged their production for 1 year, and so the oil price shock is not going to affect their budget or the economy, which was something that we must think of doing. It's very easy to do it. We can make it part of the budget document that when you bring us this price, bring us a hedge that locks in that price for the next 12 months. We can make it part of the law every year, the appropriation bill. So we don't have to live with oil prices going up and down and every day sweating about it. It's prudent, it makes sense, and I think that's something the authorities should consider. That's one. Number two, diversifying the economy. The economy is more diversified than people think. The oil industry is no more than 10, 11% of our economy. And so when people keep saying diversify the economy, what they're saying is diversify the foreign exchange earnings. That's what they're talking about. That's not diversified. It's all oil dependent. And to do that, we must start making goods, either that we consume, which will reduce the impact on imports, or that are good enough to compete worldwide so we can export it. But the issue is we must make things we can either consume or sell. And so our economy is quite diversified. If you look at all the sectors, you'll find that oil is maybe 10% of the economy.
We do have some, I know we have some, in the agri sector, for instance, some cash crops that we do export as some byproducts from. But I'm just wondering, obviously, there are not enough. And when you speak to many of these, because I've had a couple of them here, some of these industry leaders, either from fisheries or leather or whatever, they all keep talking about the fact that, look, we need the federal government support to, there's always the need for one intervention or another to help, support that particular sector so that they can get to the level where they can actually export significant amounts of that product for more foreign exchange.
To do that, you need financing, you need education, training, and you need power/infrastructure. But we need to be competitive. There's no reason on earth. We have plenty of fish in Nigerian waters. There's no reason we shouldn't be a fish exporter, but we're a fish importer. So we need to be, so when we're talking about diversifying, now I understand that our dependence on foreign rice has dropped. That's what everybody says. And they had the picture of the rice pyramids in Kano. But our rice is not good enough to export. And so we must look at being able to earn foreign exchange from things other than oil. But in terms of diversifying the economy, the reason why it doesn't seem to have diversified is because it is quite diversified. The only problem is that we don't have things we can sell. We don't sell planes. We don't sell cars.
And of course, much of the foreign exchange continues to come from that one commodity.
So yes, that's the problem. Foreign exchange earnings have not been diversified, but the economy has been diversified.
So what lessons, because for those who are watching and are saying to themselves, okay, we know what the problems are. We know the CBN has done a lot to, through its intervention schemes, through the DMBs to, put out, give out concessionary loans to some of these industries, especially agriculture and manufacturing. But for fiscal authorities, what lessons can we walk away with? Okay, this is all depend. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, we're on the other side of the pandemic. And because I've heard of talk of, can we have a non-oil budget? I don't know how feasible that is. We're still largely dependent on this one commodity. But what can we do differently when this is all over in terms of, okay, this is a lesson we've learned. Okay, I suppose you've mentioned one, hedging. But what else can we do?
Well, I think you'll be surprised that when you look at the revenues of the federal government, that oil is not necessarily the biggest. I think FIRS is competitive in terms of revenues for federal government. And I think that customs is competitive. So I don't think that, again, when people talk about oil, the focus is on foreign exchange. But when you look at our budget, because our budget is in Naira, much of the input into the budget is not, I will bet you petroleum is not more than 1/3 of it. So again, if we stop consuming foreign goods, we wouldn't need foreign exchange. So the way to reduce foreign goods is either to weaken your currency so that foreign goods are prohibitively expensive, or grow your economy, or both. I have always been on the camp of both. Let's grow our economy double digits, and that can be done. This is a tough time to do it, but we'll get past this. Grow our economy at double digits and allow our currency to weaken in an orderly fashion in such a manner that foreign goods are not so attractive. Foreign schools are not so attractive. Foreign medicine is not so attractive. Champagne is not so attractive. Foreign cars of the high variety, the Mercedes and the Range Rovers, are not so attractive. You can do that without disrupting the lives of most of your citizens.
Now, for critical sectors like power, we need a lot of money, obviously, to go into that this year. There were lots of plans.
No.
Some loans that were taken were tied to specifically to some projects.
The problem with power is not money. The problem with power is the tariff. You are making power companies supply power at a level that they're not making enough money. So they're not making the investments. If you allow, there's some power companies that are going into deals with estates where they say, we'll give 18-hour power, but pay us more.
The willing buyer, willing seller.
And it's working. But now NERC, the Regulatory Commission, is now clamping down on those arrangements and saying, those arrangements, you must use our tariff. The tariff does not encourage business. If you allow any disco, to charge what the market will bear for the next 5 years, you will have all the power you need. But there's implied subsidy in electricity. There's debt being owed them because they're selling below their cost. And as long as you treat power as a social good, you will never have it. If you treat it as a capital good and you tell these guys to go, like the telephones, the telephone companies nobody was told what they should charge initially. And that's why they made so much money that we have all the phones we need right now, at least all the cell phones we need right now. We must be cold-blooded about it and say, if you can't afford power, then wait. till those that can afford it have paid through the nose for it.
Wait and stay in darkness? We would say that to especially those in the rural areas. Wait and stay in darkness while the rest of the population has power?
But yes, exactly. That's what I'm saying. And it sounds cruel, but that's the fact. Not everybody can ride a Mercedes-Benz. You don't say everybody should have a Mercedes-Benz.
Power is considered basic.
Why?
When politicians come to the podium and make campaign promises, it's one of the things they promise.
I understand, but why is power basic? Power is just an input into production. And if you can't afford an input into production, then you wait until the price comes down. And it sounds cruel, and I'm actually liberal by nature. But the fact remains that if you can't afford, and if you cannot afford champagne, don't drink it. If you can't afford power, you won't have it. I grew up with kerosene lamps. I did. I grew up in the village with kerosene lamps. I didn't like it, but we couldn't afford it at that time.
Mustafa, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. That's all we have time for. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us today. And we're hoping that this, we do come out on the other side of this COVID pandemic. Thank you for your time today. I've been speaking to Mustafa Chike-Obi. He's Executive Vice Chairman of Alpha African Advisory. That's our show for today. Many thanks for being a part of it. From myself and the team, it's bye for now.